Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. It's my great pleasure to bring you an interview I've actually had in my back pocket for a couple of weeks due to lots of other podcasts and trips and recordings that I've been doing in between. But I'm very delighted to bring you this interview that I recently recorded with Dhesi. Now, he is a Labor MP and he chairs the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, which many of you may know just handed down a fairly brutal and scathing assessment of the progress of AUKUS to date. AUKUS, for those of you who don't know, is the plan from Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines from the United States and from the UK. How it will work is that Australia will firstly buy 2 or 3 off-the-shelf boats from the United States. And then after that, Australia and the UK want to build a new generation or next class, first of its type submarine called SSN AUKUS, based on the Astute class. Things are not going well, to put it mildly, on both sides. In the US, we have uncertainty about whether the United States can reach its own production targets in order to deliver Australia the 3 boats it says it wants to. And in the UK, well, the build programs are well known. I mean, hardly any projects get out the door on time in the UK and certainly not on budget. And Australia's already had a bad first-hand experience of this with the frigates that it's purchased from BAE. So what makes the likelihood of creating a new submarine together any easier? That is the topic that Dhesi will discuss. I met him in his very tiny constituency office just a couple of weeks ago in Slough. Dhesi, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, an absolute delight, Latika, to welcome you to my Slough constituency and welcome to our office.
It's funny because I only know Slough from the office.
Oh, there you go. See, we are world famous, right? But it's a huge business hub here, right here in Slough. And given that we're right next to London Heathrow, many of our Australian friends, for them, it's very, very close. Although many of them do end up going to Windsor nearby.
Yes, it was remarkably easy to get here from London. So you are the chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, and you've just handed down what I might say is a very good piece of work in this review you've done into AUKUS. Why did you decide to conduct it and when?
Well, look, a year ago, we decided to embark on this. In fact, when I was elected as chair of the Defence Committee almost 2 years ago, this was one of the key things on my manifesto that if I was elected as chair, I wanted to look into AUKUS to see what progress has been made, hasn't been made, where is this trilateral strategic partnership currently sitting at. All of those things were things that I wanted to look into, as well as, for example, Ukraine and European security and so on. So the very first inquiry that we launched was actually UK's contribution to European security. Mm-hmm. But then last year, we launched our inquiry into AUKUS, and it has taken us a year of very detailed, comprehensive work. And thank you for your kind words. And I hope that this will act as a catalyst for all 3 governments, but in particular the UK government, to get a move on, to do more, to do it faster, because this trilateral strategic partnership will take a familial relationship into a long-term strategic partnership and relationship for decades to come. That's why this is really important. And another reason that is that billions of pounds, and likewise in Australia, billions of dollars are being invested into this incredibly important partnership. And we need to make sure that there is value for money for the taxpayer. And we also need to make sure that those dreams and aspirations are realized and that we don't just have a faltering along, as, by the way, our inquiry did find that there have been bumps in the road and we are just not moving at the fast enough pace to realise the full potential of this partnership.
So did you hold these concerns when you're in opposition watching AUKUS? Did you think, I'm a little worried that this is not getting off the ground as fast as something of this scale should?
When AUKUS was announced by all 3 leaders, and by the way, since then there have been changes in government, things have moved on, many of us felt, right, okay, that's excellent in terms of what has been announced, but let's now actually see what will be achieved, what has been achieved. And unfortunately, unlike in Australia, when the House of Commons Defence Committee, we did a comprehensive visit out there as well. We went out to Canberra, went out to Adelaide, and then over to Western Australia as well to see progress there. In Australia, there was a lot more knowledge about the partnership. There seems to have been a greater social license. People are talking about it more. And in the UK, apart from some of us defense geeks and other experts and academics and people involved in politics, there didn't seem to be as much enthusiastic, energetic debate, discussion, movement on this. And that is why I felt that, look, this is something that we do need to do because this is such a huge undertaking. And I don't think anybody in Australia, by the way, Latika, should be under any misconception. This is a colossal undertaking. It should be seen as a national endeavour. And likewise for us here in the UK, this should be the government coming in full weight behind this. So we just wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of it, to hear from academics, from experts, and also obviously ministers as well. We had very fruitful discussions when we were there. The individuals, for example, like Dennis, who headed up the AUKUS review in Australia, we met with your defence minister, the shadow defence minister, political leaders out there, and we got a cross section of views while we were in Australia as well. But that's what we wanted really to get right into the crux of the matter. And yeah, there were various concerning things that came out of that, which I hope has come across in our AUKUS report.
Correct me if you think this interpretation is wrong, but it seemed to me that your report identified a culture of drift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are the reasons for the drift?
There are various reasons for this. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. We live in a lot more volatile world. In the UK, we're facing with a threat closer to home. You've got the war in Ukraine, the illegal invasion by Russia. We've got a change of administration in the US and the Trump administration taking a very different stance on life and on geopolitics. We've now then got this war now in the Middle East. Obviously, there's been tensions for considerable amount of time there as well. And given these various challenges, obviously there was a pandemic coming out of that, trying to get economic growth. Given that context and that backdrop, that I think could well have led to a situation whereby the eye's been taken off the ball. We now need to make sure that our government here in the UK, as well as, by the way, in Australia and the US, that people focus back, because this is an incredible opportunity, but with it are considerable challenges. And what we found, for example, in the UK, we need a lot more infrastructure investment into His Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, as well as in HMNB Devonport, as well as in Barrow in Furness, the home of British submarine shipbuilding. Now, there have been lots of promises, and the government has made strides. There have been, whether it was the last government, whether it's the current government, announcements of funding. Money has been going in. We did visit all of those locations as well to see for ourselves progress. But it is without a shadow of a doubt that we still do not have enough dry dock facilities. That's why £500 million worth of submarine refurbishment works has been delayed. We've seen during our visit to the US when we were out, not just to liaise with our counterparts on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C. more widely, but also when we were out in Newport News, went out to JFC Norfolk, what we saw was that the Americans themselves are not meeting their targets of 2 subs. They're currently, I believe, around 1.2. That obviously is a cause of concern for them as well as the wider AUKUS partnership. Things can be brought back online, but it just needs all 3 administrations working at pace. And by the way, Pillar 1 in terms of the delivery of SSN AUKUS, that is not just important for Australia out there as you are seeing a more volatile Indo-Pacific and you want to secure your own defense and security, but SSN AUKUS delivery is also very, very important for the UK itself to secure our security in the Euro-Atlantic when we see more Russian spy ships, the subs, They're surveying our work here.
Because you're going to use the same submarines, right, to protect your
Precisely.
own
That's
waters
right.
up here. Yeah.
So while Australia will be provided with those Virginia class subs at the outset, I think what's really exciting and what actually makes this into a more strategic partnership, the excitement actually comes from working in collaboration to build our own sovereign capabilities into the decades to come. Obviously, there's a lot of love for Australia here in the UK, not just because we have the same head of state. There is, I mean, I've got lots of family and friends out there. That is a similar sort of situation for many Brits. Lots of Australians are regularly coming to the UK to live or work. But what is really missing, and this partnership, by the way, will actually fill that void. The missing part is that strategic partnership where we build our own sovereign capabilities. If it was just a case of just buying off the shelf subs from another nation or whatever, I don't think that is as exciting as embedding one another into each other's. For example, Australian submariners are being embedded into the Royal Navy as well as into the US Navy. You've got a lot of collaboration going on between businesses across all three nations, because while Pillar 1 is important, the real opportunity, Latika, is actually in Pillar 2, I think, for British and Australian SMEs in particular, because that will mean that we are able to get a lot more economic growth, lot more well-paid jobs in both the UK and in Australia, for example. But even there, we felt that there was drift, because despite that promise, what we're actually seeing is there's almost as if the eye's been taken off the ball there once again with regards to Pillar 2. And we needed to get a more focus. So the governments need to get more focus on Pillar 2 as well, if we are to reap the full benefits of that. Those enhanced capabilities, whether it's in hypersonics, whether it's in AI and so forth, there is so much exquisite equipment being built. For example, in the UK, we're very proud of our defence industrial base. And what is being produced at the moment is good, but to take it to the next level and to make sure that we are working effectively with our American and Australian counterparts, those impediments to workforce mobility, those need to be dealt with. For example, one of our recommendations was that we need to consider an AUKUS visa, perhaps to get more movement, because at the moment, when we're at a fledgling stage, if we're seeing those impediments now, this will only become a worsened situation if we don't have more smooth mobility, not just in terms of our service personnel, but also in terms of businesses. We met many.
And that would require a harmonisation of clearances, right? Because,
precisely.
correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's still the case in the UK that if someone like me who has dual citizenship, but we're in this AUKUS collaboration, which is the most secret, exquisite capabilities possible, I actually couldn't work for you in the security sense and have access to fully classified material because I'm from another country.
There you go. That's an excellent example. And that's why that coordination in terms of bureaucracy needs to be undertaken. So that's why we said that we should be considering an AUKUS visa. I know that the opinions are divided amongst the nations and amongst experts on this particular issue.
Because I think there's a bit of a fear that we'll snatch all your workers, right? Lure them down under.
I think there will be concern. Like I said, while there are many opportunities that AUKUS offers, there are challenges, and each particular nation, each particular company will be seeing its own particular threat that it might perceive. But the way to work through that is to make sure that we have that smooth transition. There are many in Australia who would be concerned, 1 minute, people might move over to the US and the UK, and vice versa, by the way. So there are many in the UK who think, 1 minute, people might be attracted by the sun and the sand of Australia. And then there are others saying, no, 1 minute, along with the sun and the sand, they've also got snakes and flies and everything else. So look, I think all of that aside, the stereotypes aside, what we need to do is to look at that long-term partnership, look at long-term growth, and also a government's primary duty is to protect its people. So in terms of defence and security, and myself as the chair of the Defence Committee, what concerns me most is how are we working with allies. Like, for example, here in Europe, we're working a lot more closely with European allies, and in terms of NATO as well. AUKUS is another excellent opportunity for us. If we're saying that we're global Britain, then we need to be making sure that we're discharging our duties towards our allies across the globe, in particular our Five Eyes partners, and in particular including Australia.
So this faltering that you describe, and you use that word in the report, I have to say I've always been worried, very worried about the delivery of these submarines. And I've always convinced myself, no, Latika, you're being too catastrophist. When I read your report, I actually became more worried. Should Australia be trusting the UK with the billions that we are paying you that you can deliver, because you haven't delivered on time on frigates? We're undertaking something that is so hugely complex and ambitious, particularly for Australia, which has no experience in creating these sorts of submarines. Can we trust you, or do we need to start seriously thinking about a backup plan?
Well, one thing that I'm very, very proud of with regards to the British Defence Industrial Base is our ability to make exquisite pieces of kit, not just in terms of subs, but if we look at frigates, if we look at in terms of fighter jets, if we look at so
But it's
many
in the
other...
time and for the cost allocated.
Oh yeah, look, 100%. Look, Australians and like yourself, Latika, you'll have your concerns, but believe me, as a British taxpayer, I want to make sure that we are getting bang for our buck right here. So we will be holding our government to account. And those SSN AUKUS, that's what I said in my earlier remarks, they're important for Australia, but they are critical also for the UK going forward. So it's important. And like I said, the exciting thing here, and why Australia there should be a lot of excitement there, is that the US and the UK, what has taken them decades to achieve, they're actually helping our Australian friends to achieve that in the matter of years. And that's why I said it's a colossal undertaking, because the level of safety, the standards that need to be met for subs, is considerably higher than in many other fields. And look, I'm confident that if we have the right focus, the government, by the way, one of the best things that they did, appoint a point person. So Stephen Lovegrove as the Prime Minister's special representative on AUKUS, that's important. And I think, by the way, Australia and the US should be doing likewise. That's the one way that we can drive through this program. And
Is
that lack
envoy
of...
actually enough? I've been wondering if we need a dedicated minister.
Well, we need that point person, first of all, who is the Prime Minister's representative. So rather than just a minister within the Ministry of Defence, that point person who has the ability to work cross government departments is incredibly important. But what I think also needs to be done is that we need all three leaders again in a showpiece event, just to focus hearts and minds, to have that restatement, to recommit ourselves. That I think is important, because then that increases the knowledge about AUKUS within the wider public in all three nations.
So you want to see Albo, Trump, Starmer lining up like Biden, Morrison, Boris did virtually.
Precisely.
And saying, let's give this another
I think while the US administration has recommitted itself in terms of, I believe President Trump said, is full steam ahead when he was with Prime Minister Albanese. The UK Prime Minister, by the way, has done likewise. I know ministers, including the Defence Secretary, have been out in Australia. Look, all of that is good, but I think we need, at the very, very top level, that leadership, that visible leadership, needs to come from our Prime Minister. It needs to come from all three political leaders. And look, what we need to do is also to mobilise the industrial base within all three nations. Because at present, everybody's talking a good game, but in terms of delivery, we are plodding along, but we should really be racing along.
So this sends chills to my heart, actually, because when you say plodding along, that is, no offence, but it is exactly my experience of Britain living here, is that you do things well enough, you get by. but sometimes you could go the extra mile and you don't. And that's what I fear is happening here as well. Keir Starmer talked very, very positively about AUKUS when he began as Prime Minister. I don't know if you were there. I'm sure you were at this event at the House of Commons when Warren Stevens, the US ambassador, made his debut here. He was Trump's point man, and he gave a very glowing speech about AUKUS. And so did Starmer. And I was very, very impressed and reassured by that. Since then, he has barely talked about AUKUS. You're a Labor MP, you were in his shadow cabinet, I think, when he was in opposition. Have you gone to him and said, mate, can you give us a foot up on this?
Well, I've raised this with the Prime Minister, with the Secretary of State for Defence. In fact, I've raised it publicly on the floor of the House, several Defence Committee evidence sessions. We've discussed about it. I'm also a member of the Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy in Parliament. We've discussed there, by the way, in terms of threats to undersea cables, the importance of our submarines, and the extra focus that needs to be on it. Look, the government response is that, look, we are putting in investment, record investment since the end of the Cold War, that this is the largest sustained increase in defense spending, which technically is correct. But what the likes of me want is we want to meet the moment, given the highly volatile situation that we find ourselves in terms of geopolitics. We need to make sure that we are meeting not just 2.5% as the government has done for next year in terms of the target, but in order to meet the 3.5% NATO target on conventional defence spending by 2035, we feel that by the end of this parliament, we need to get to 3%. The government hasn't committed to it thus far. And that is something that myself and other members of the Defence Committee will keep pushing on a cross-party basis. So the government is saying that...
Why isn't the government committing to this? The UK has actually gone backwards in the latest NATO league tables. You're at 12th position now in terms of how much you spend in NATO. Again, Keir Starmer came into government promising to be a security prime minister. And you know what? I believed him. I took this seriously. Yeah. And now the opposite is happening. Why is Labor failing here?
Well, look, in terms of defence spending, like I said, what the government will say after years and years of hollowing out, and there has literally been a downward spiral. As I've been an MP now for 9 years, we've seen government after government, everybody coming in saying great things, yep, in terms of defence and security, but unfortunately we've seen what has been a hollowing out of defence, whereby we've seen the level of GDP spend on defence has been decreasing. Now, overall, that's not a good place. So the government is saying, well, look, since the end of the Cold War, we have now brought it back up. And they're saying, well, look, the last Labour government was the one that spent 2.5% on defence spending. And now we're the first one since then to come up to that level. But what we're arguing in particular is that, okay, agreed with that, but we need to do more. And I know it wasn't in your manifesto commitment to get to 3% by the end of this parliament, but we need to see the threat level. The UK, by the way, Latika, is the third most targeted nation on the planet in terms of cyber attacks. Last year alone, it cost British businesses £15 billion. We had the very famous JLR, Jaguar Land Rover case, whereby people couldn't get to work for weeks on end. They lost more than £1 billion. We've seen attacks, not just in terms of Ministry of Defence sites, but also in terms of cyber attacks on our businesses, so as well as on our National Health Service. So we need to firm up those defence expenditure levels in order to keep ourselves safe, and also to ensure that we're meeting NATO targets going to the future, and also to send a clear demand signal to our allies and adversaries that we are serious about defence. Because if we don't invest now, we will be sorry in the years to come.
How would you pay for it? I mean, you're in a very beautiful position of knowing and understanding the threat.
That is for somebody a lot more higher paid than me. It's up to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in particular to work out how they're going to be working through that.
But I ask this quite seriously because the last time the Chancellor tried to chop, I think it was around $5 billion in welfare cuts, the Labor backbench rebelled and stopped it from going through. So I'm not necessarily one of these people who says you either have benefits or bullets. I think that's a bit binary, but it's very clear that some things have to be chopped to pay for defence. You're a Labor MP. Can you not work on forming a consensus amongst your colleagues or even across the crossbench to fund defence? Because this is something that transcends politics, doesn't it?
Look, definitely. Look, we need cross-party consensus on defence spending, and I think everybody's agreed that we do need, apart from, by the way, some very, very outlier MPs or parties, I think most individuals would agree that we do need to be more capable ourselves, and that's why that defence spending increase is required. The points that you've just made, those are the very points that I made to Lord Robertson during my recent interactions with him during evidence sessions, that the choice is not binary. It's not either defence or welfare. It's not bullets or butter. It's a lot more nuanced than that. We within the Defence Committee have looked at certain measures that the government should be taking in terms of defence financing. So whether it's following our German friends who are renowned for their fiscal prudence, but what they have decided is to significantly ramp up their spending on defence. What they have decided is that they're going to loosen the fiscal rules just for defence. So I raised that point on the floor of the House.
And is that what you would favour personally?
Well, look, I have put out various things. I know that the political parties, that they've said that there are other proposals, for example, defence bonds. We've also looked into the Defence Security and Resilience Bank option. Unfortunately, the government didn't move on that. I know that the Canadians and others are moving forward with regards to that. It's not just all about public spending. It's about how we entice more private investment to accelerate that spending as well. So there are different ways to look at this. And that's why I said that financing should be looked at in the round, but the government does need to make strides with regards to defence spending, and more to the point, it also needs to publish its defence investment plan, because that, I think, is incredibly important. That was promised in autumn. The government is saying that it's working at pace, so I look forward to a speedy publication of that, because that again will send a clear demand signal to our defence industrial base as to where the investment is going to go. And once the government actually sends that signal, I think then private investment will also then follow, because they will see what are the capabilities that the government is looking to invest into.
Can the UK deliver on AUKUS if you don't lift your capability targets and spending?
Well, look, based on current trajectories, obviously this is a partnership for the decades, so the government would say that we will be meeting those targets, and this is all factored in. What we're saying is, look, AUKUS, that's good, but at this point in time, we need a lot more than that. We need an integrated air and missile defense system. We need to make sure that we have more investment in our frigates. I know the government has signed a multi-billion-pound deal with Norway for frigates, and also in terms of the huge multi-billion-pound contract with Turkey for the Typhoon jets. So there are lots of positive messages and lots of positive growth happening as well. But we just need to make sure that we are upping our game to meet the moment.
So one of the things your report canvassed was what became a little bit embarrassing, I think, was the deployment of your submarine to Australia at the time.
I raised that, yeah.
At the time the Middle East war starts, and you have this great song and dance show and tell of your submarine at HMAS Stirling. But hang on, we actually needed that to be doing something. I wonder, is the actual physical presence of UK subs required in the Indo-Pacific for AUKUS to work? Was that a mistake to stretch it so far?
It is without a doubt that the Royal Navy is overstretched. It is stretched to its limits, but in terms of the AUKUS partnership, I think that commitment needs to be seen through, because this isn't just about providing submarines to Australia. I think that presence and getting our Australian friends used to that working environment wherein submarines are coming into HMA Stirling, the building of Perth. Perth is going to be the new Plymouth. Yeah, that needs years of work, and where people
you would have gone to Rockingham. I mean,
yes, I've been to Rockingham.
I've met
with the mayor of Rockingham, and I've got a little key ring to prove it as well. But all of that is I think, really important because the embedding, as I said earlier, of personnel from all three nations, our submarines going out there, our brave servicemen and women being used to the environment out there, working with our colleagues, and vice versa. I think that needs to be done. We can't just wait for the coming decades to provide submarines and just leave our Australian friends just to operate as they would. The
But do you,
interoperability and
Tan, do you,
interchangeability can only come about if we have the subs being deployed, and that definitely needs to increase. Sorry.
no, I'm fascinated by that. But you're talking about this in terms of interoperability. What about actual fighting? I mean, the window for potential movement on Taiwan is beginning next year. And certainly all the intelligence assessments think it's not going to happen next year, but that window is now open. So do you envision some sort of role here of actual conflict and fighting if it comes to that?
Well, look, I was over in Taiwan for a week in the recent years, and I've seen the sort of work that's going on there. Obviously, they're relying on their allies, so whether it's Australia, the UK, the US, and others. And look, whether it's about Taiwan, whether it's about further afield, I mean, the wider Indo-Pacific defense and security needs to be taken in the round, and that's where I think it's important that we have that visible presence from US subs, from British subs, and in future, when we have SSN AUKUS, I think it's about subs being able to move around without being restricted to a particular area. And I think at this point in time, that presence is important. But as I said, at the moment, it's not just about submarines. When we looked at the overstretched nature of our commitments, we were not able to deploy at pace, as in immediately, when the Middle East conflict started, a naval asset into the Mediterranean. And that's something that we now need to wake up to that reality. And we within, as in the UK government, needs to accelerate that investment. That's why I'm saying that there's a lot of positive things going on in terms of frigates, in terms of submarines, but our naval investment needs to be accelerated in the here and now. We can't just plod along.
Mm-hmm. And just finally, the status quo, which is unfortunately what looks like your government is adopting, does that mean AUKUS turns from faltering to failure?
Well, look, there are too many people who are heavily invested for them to see it fail, but faltering is, in my eyes, a failure. That we cannot just be faltering and just plodding along. So it's important that parliamentarians like myself bring these issues to the fore. We've been having lots and lots of events and meetings in Parliament just to raise the consciousness amongst other MPs about the importance of AUKUS for their constituencies, the jobs that come with it, the defence and security that comes with it. And I think that's another thing, that the government's promising that national conversation, that we need to accelerate that as well. That's the way that you get public buy-in. And when more people become aware about AUKUS, then more questions will be asked. Then we will have not just the Defence Committee looking into progress, but others, people within the media, other parliamentarians thinking, okay, one of these jobs coming. Oh, you're saying this about Pillar 2. We've got a company looking into UAVs or hypersonics in our constituency. So when is that investment coming? When can I see growth from companies in my constituency? That's what we need to see from those various MPs and those various constituencies. And likewise, I think Australian businesses should be pushing their government hard. I think whether it's Australian media, whether it's the wider public, to say, look, what are we getting? When are we getting it? What's the government doing? And like many of our friends in Australia will be doing, we'll be doing the same thing here in the UK. And when we were in the US, by the way, there was cross-party support for AUKUS. That was good to see, because we always test the waters with our American friends whenever we're out there. So we were there for a week just to talk to them again as to what were their opinions, have their strategic objectives changed, what are their views, and they were all of the opinion that nope, we want to see AUKUS delivered, and we will be pushing on that. But they're also concerned about the pace of progress. So that, I think, is the thing that needs to be rectified.
I almost wonder if we need a dedicated envoy for all three.
That's
I almost wonder if Boris or someone could be the right person to just take it up full gutso, be able to communicate it at a retail level to everybody, and just with sheer force of personality drive some of this stuff through.
At the moment, we just need 3 special representatives. At the moment, we've got 1 in one nation. I think until we even get to that position, where those 3 are then able to act on behalf of their political leaders in those 3 nations, come together on a regular basis, then get the leaders together to have more high-profile meetings, and that is the way to push things along. I don't know whether our Australian or American friends would agree to a Brit leading that particular initiative, or whether we're
You want it to be Aussie, I guess.
yeah, the Aussies would want an Aussie one, and no doubt the Americans will want one of theirs.
We could have it rotating like a Secretary General position.
There you go.
Just finally, Tan, you've never once questioned the rationale for AUKUS, despite all these strains that you described since AUKUS was first announced. Did your review examine whether you should even stick to this project?
Oh, look, that's something that we definitely looked at. We, as I said, heard differing points of view. For example, I had more than a half-hour interview, a meeting with your former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, and I took on board his views and opinions.
He is a reader of my Substack and a big critic of this program.
Precisely.
Because he does not think it's viable.
There you go. So there are differing viewpoints in all 3 nations amongst different individuals, but suffice it to say that all 3 governments have committed. They are very much, heavily now invested in this program and partnership, and we just want to make sure that, having looked into why it was set up, how it was set up, what are the objectives, are those deliverable? And we thought, yes, they are deliverable, and yes, it is exciting as hell. This is incredible what could be achieved. Like I said, that family relationship could become a strategic partnership, a relationship for decades to come. That would embed our 3 nations more closely together, but also the promise of sovereign capabilities. The SSN AUKUS, what that can deliver, the enhanced capabilities around Pillar 2. That there's a lot of excitement there. So the rationale is there. That we could see as we went along with the review, listen to the experts, and the overwhelming opinion amongst those within defence was that, yep, this is a good thing. So taking on board that overall viewpoint, it's now a case of, is it going to be delivered on time, on budget? When will it be delivered? How is it going to be delivered? Who's doing what they should be? Who's not doing what they should be? And to really us to keep asking the questions and keep pushing and prodding this.
And Tan would be ignorant not to acknowledge that the great elephant in the room with British Labour is a leadership crisis around your own Prime Minister. If they do decide to change Keir Starmer, and we're not having that conversation on this podcast, but if they did, can I trust that you would be saying to whoever is vying for your vote, you have to deliver on AUKUS? That's a condition of, if you take on the leadership, you have to do this for us.
I think you can take it as read that cross-party, there's a lot of support for AUKUS within Parliament. I've spoken to lots and lots of MPs on this particular issue. There is an all-party parliamentary group on AUKUS. There haven't been any negative soundings coming out from Parliament. And by the way, it's a heated parliamentary chamber, as you know. If people had an opposing viewpoint, they would definitely be raising it. But look, for me, regardless of which Prime Minister, regardless of which government is in charge, if the UK government has committed to it, previous, current, and so on, that needs to be delivered upon. We cannot be making billions of pounds of investment and then people not being held to account and people not delivering, because our defence and security is just way too important for any one Prime Minister or government to fail on that. And rest assured, I and others will be holding people's feet to the fire to deliver just that.
Thank you for your passion. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I have got a safe feeling this is not the first of many appearances.
Well, I think absolute delight. I think last time we caught up was when we were in the Globsec forum.
We were in a bus, weren't we?
Yeah, I remember we were out in Prague, I think it was at the time. Obviously very enjoyable discussion that evening as well around AUKUS, around all things defence and security.
We talked actually a lot about some of these things which your report has gone into do a great deep dive
on. Having looked into that, and that was an off-the-record chat, and now this is an exclusive one-to-one podcast and interview. So I hope your listeners will have gained the passion within the Defence Committee and will actually read this very important seminal piece of work with regards to AUKUS. I think this is the first time that any parliament has actually looked into a full parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. I hope in the US and in Australia that they will do likewise as well, because I think that will help to further focus minds. It's up to, obviously, I'm not compelling any of our fellow parliamentarians, my friends. By the way, I have made up lots of friends while I was out in Australia and the US, and thank you very much to our Australian friends for the warmth. Look, whether it was a speaker giving us a shout out when we were sitting in the chamber, and then he hosted us for a reception thereafter, brought other parliamentarians along. The time and attention that was given to us, the high-level representations that we had to our AUKUS inquiry, including from Dennis Richardson, as I said, absolutely incredible visit. We packed in a hell of a lot within 6 or 7 days. It was one meeting after another. I remember landing in Perth.
But that's a punishing schedule.
It was a punishing schedule. We landed in Perth, and the following morning at 7:30, we had a meeting with the Western Australia Defence Minister. So, no, but everybody made time, and we learnt a great deal. And it was great to see that passion out there in Australia for defence and security, and I would have expected nothing less. But their interaction with their British colleagues was so hugely appreciated. So I came away with a very warm glow, with a nice feeling, but nice feelings are not enough. We now need to push on AUKUS, so I would hope that they also embark upon similar inquiries, literally just to get to the nuts and bolts of things. And that's the best way that we can ensure delivery, because AUKUS will be delivered. The shape and format is yet to be determined, whether those targets and deadlines are met as set out originally. But we need to make sure that that is done.
Dheshi, thank you so much for joining the podcast. You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.